Okay, excellent. We're back with my lovely friends. Aaron, say hello.
Hello.
And Peter, say hello.
Hello.
Wonderful. This week we're going to talk about Dominic Cummings because I don't feel like that's been covered in enough depth by other people. The BBC, Brexit shenanigans, and Trump versus Twitter. Excellent. Also, I'm not sure if I can edit this, so we're going to have to go for the whole 30 minutes without any kind of slip-ups, mishaps, heavy breathing, or any of the other problems that I normally have when I'm online.
Oh, God. Okay.
We had comments on our last video, unbelievably. The comment, would you like to know what it was? Did you read it?
Of course.
Of course.
I think that's all I ever do with my free time is look at internet comments.
We had a comment saying, "Thank God this will cure my insomnia." How do we feel about that? What should we do about this comment? Don't be so tight-lipped now. I think the suggestion is that we should be more combative, more assertive, and, Peter, stop being more boring than anyone else. That's who we're going to blame here.
I do apologise. It is all my fault. Appreciate
that I can edit this better next time, so probably not the fireworks this week, but onwards. Anyway, Dominic Cummings and goings, all of that. How do we feel? I'm interested to know what Peter thinks about this. What do you really think about it? Beyond the front page of Reddit.
About him breaking lockdown rules? Or
Him breaking lockdown rules is a controversial thing to say, but about his behaviour, we could say. How do you feel about it, Peter?
I think it's... Well, I think everyone has probably broken the rules somewhat. It's probably not that big a deal, but given who he is and the position he's in, he probably should be one of the people who isn't doing that. And then the fact that there's now a media circus around him is a little bit weird. But maybe that's also to do with the other things that he's done in the past that maybe are coming back to into the public consciousness.
Peter, interesting that you should say this. What are you implying? That there's been inauthentic motivations by our media in the treatment of Mr. Cummings?
I think there will be a point in history when people look back and he is a topic of deep discussion. So, I can imagine right now a lot of people are resenting him a little bit for various things that he's orchestrated.
Indeed. Aaron, how do you feel?
I actually don't know what the big fuss is about. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't really know a lot about the Dominic Cummings, what happens with Dominic Cummings, except for the fact that he broke lockdown. I did come across a little snippet of information this morning, which basically said that apparently someone else, I think from the SNP, did the exact same thing, traveled 600 miles back up to Scotland or to Fife or wherever he was from. But he was being criticized because of that, as in the SNP person who criticized Dominic Cummings was being criticized about that, because apparently the reason why Dominic Cummings had to break lockdown rules and had to travel was because he didn't have any childcare. So I actually don't know, what the big fuss is about. As Peter said, I'm sure a lot of people's, pretty much a large majority of people have broken lockdown rules. I think I'm probably more interested to find out how Peter broke lockdown rules.
Oh yeah, Peter, how did you?
I said most people, not myself. I have 8 days, and I have not left the house in however many weeks it's been.
Very good.
I'm also curious about that because Peter seems to be like the person out of the three of us. He's like the person that's least likely to break the lockdown rules. So that admission kind of like rocked my very core.
Aaron, do you wear glasses?
Yes. Well,
When you went to have your glasses measured up, did the optician at any point bring out a bouncy castle for you to have a look at?
No,
So no castles have ever been used for you to have an eye test with?
No. They had a little balloon that I had to look at. Just hot air balloon.
I'm trying to be funny and perhaps failing that Dominic Cummings had to drive 30 miles to go and look at a castle for the sake of his child's eyes or his eyes. Really, I find the whole thing so conflated and confusing, all of these details. I can barely keep up with what is actually real and what isn't real.
Is that not the point, though?
Well, is that not the point? Indeed.
But shouldn't it be them? Just out of curiosity, I think, to be perfectly honest with you, for me anyway, I think the one thing that's really frustrating about this this news article or this news feed, is that how is this even newsworthy? And I think that the other thing as well is that it seems that during lockdown, one of my pet peeves is the fact that there's a lot of people that get on their high horse, and who, I guess, I don't know, it's almost like, that nosy, retiree neighbor that you had who
Mhm.
watches you the moment that you water your garden too much or whatever it might be. That seems to be like the state of affairs that we're in at the moment. So, I've had people kind of like tell me that, oh, I shouldn't be going on cycle rides. And I was like, I'm sorry, but you know what? It's the one way I keep my sanity,
Yeah.
Well, indeed, more power to you. I am slightly appalled that we've got into a situation where we are so happy to be locked up inside our houses. I wouldn't have thought that this would have been one of the characteristics of the British. I thought we'd all be a bit more independent. And if I did something and someone asked me where I was going, I would probably tell them it's none of their business. And it is a bit of a shame that our police force has spent a lot of time complaining that they don't have resources. And now it push comes to shove and they can tell everyone off who's walking a dog in the middle of nowhere via drone.
Yeah, who knew they had so many drones?
Who knew they had so many drones? It's almost like we live in a police state, which, I mean, some leading lights from the left has said, thank goodness we are living in a conservative controlled police state. I'm parodying Owen Jones, who tweeted that, which I found quite funny if you know his work. Beyond that, how do we feel that the BBC have reported on this? And the others, of course, ITV and Sky.
I haven't seen the BBC reporting, but I'm guessing that the BBC reported on this with utmost impartiality and
is there a hint of
objectivity,
insincerity?
And by the way, just so everyone's clear, I am actually being very sarcastic about it.
Yeah, we got that, don't worry. It just strikes me that a lot of people have something against Dominic Cummings from Brexit times, that he was a leading light. He is considered to be one of the architects of the Brexit that we've had, much to Nigel Farage's disappointment if he's stolen this crown off him. And the BBC, Sky News and ITV got to cross-examine him inside the Rose Garden, which is an extraordinary turn of events for a government advisor to have a little trestle table in the garden of 10 Downing Street and to be asked questions about how often did his child urinate on a car journey that he may or may not have been on, and the Mirror and the Guardian reporting on someone who saw him out in a field and remarked on how pretty bluebells were, which again is unsubstantiated conjecture media. And then beyond that, I think the points that I wanted to bring up about the BBC specifically was the Emily Maitlis, to bring us more up to date.
So just from my understanding,
yes,
I have
Peter.
read that it is incredibly rare, if not like never before happened, where a government advisor has been put in a position like that.
It has never before happened. And then for clarity, we've invaded countries illegally on government advisors say so. So if this was the thing, if it's all about bluebells and castles that's really broken our backs, that is a bit monstrous. Emily Maitlis on Newsnight. Do we know the comments?
No, I didn't. I missed that one.
You've missed this one. Oh, Aaron.
I've watched a couple of her videos.
Yes.
Videos of her, and they do seem quite strongly opinionated.
She gave comments that were considered unacceptable even by the BBC, and they upheld the complaints against her. And the following night, she did not broadcast on Newsnight.
Oh yeah, I did. I heard about this one, but I can't remember what her comments were though.
Well, her comments specifically, I don't want to misquote her, but implied that the country was very angry at Dominic Cummings and that he definitely did something wrong, which was an ambiguous point and goes to the heart, I think, of what people feel about the BBC as a government-funded or people-funded broadcaster that has the innate characteristic of slouching leftwards. Whenever there is a story where they can dig it into the right, they will choose to do that. So if we didn't know these comments, then it's hard to think what we can really say. But
we've known about that for a very, very long time. They've always, I think they've lost all objectivity since the Brexit vote. or even actually not the vote, the Brexit campaign.
Yes.
I think that's well, this is why I think there's been a cry at the moment to basically get rid of the TV licensing, and effectively defund the BBC, because they've lost their way. Maybe back in the 80s they might. I mean, I haven't been in the UK back then, but maybe back in the 80s they were objective and fair, but definitely not now.
The BBC has long had the reputation of not being a totally impartial media outlet, which, going back to someone else that I wanted to talk about a long time ago, was Joe Rogan, if you remember from the previous talk, where he was talking about independent news broadcasting and how there's a lack of it in America. And I would be all for that, but having watched the BBC fail to achieve that, I wonder if being truly independent and being viewless is possible for any organization that employs hundreds and hundreds of people. There would be a consensus that would bubble up eventually. Do you disagree?
No, I think it is probably incredibly difficult, especially with the BBC being the size it is, and probably because as soon as you have one group start to form, they will hire more people who think the same way as them.
Yeah.
So you're going to have it kind of catalyze into especially when, sadly, there's the view, probably not necessarily correctly, that you have to be opinionated to have your voice heard and have people watch you and take interest in you. I know technically the BBC is meant to be in a place where it doesn't need to worry about that because of the TV license.
Yes, exactly. People worrying about the BBC have the supposition that it can possibly survive on its own. Beyond that, the two talking points are that the questions that we're getting at the daily briefing are incredibly long, almost projecting an opinion on trying to become a got ya session, which is very tedious and annoying that politicians are taking this viewpoint. And Laura Koonsberg from the BBC was goading experts into passing political comments and seemed very frustrated when they declined. Boris Johnson played a blinder on that one. Being impartial is a real burden of responsibility, and I don't think the BBC is managing it, which is fine. They can have a view, but then why should we be mandated by pain of prison sentence if we don't fund it?
Well, I must admit, I don't pay for a TV license. But yet again, I get away with that because of the fact that I don't actually use free-to-air TV. So
yeah, you don't have a television, so then that's all okay. And I would advise you not to incriminate yourself. Excellent. So that's an ongoing problem. And one of the things, on a very last personal note, is I found very frustrating about the whole Cummings story was it completely overshadowed a genuine debate about a huge failing that we've had during this lockdown period, where old people the needs of them have been ignored, and they've been pushed out of NHS hospital beds and into care homes where they've caused huge amounts of damage, contributing to our astonishingly high death total. But of course, that hasn't been picked up on because political actors aren't interested in reporting news. They're interested in doing got you moments and trying to get the blood of Dominic Cummings and claim that scalp for themselves. Anyway, on to our next point, which are Aaron's points that he wanted to bring to the table. So let's see what he knows about that. What are we going to discuss first?
I think let's stay kind of like close to topic. Kind of Dominic Cummings is a bit of a good segue that you did anyway, which is being one of the architects of the Brexit, the Brexit debate and policy.
Brexit shenanigans, yes.
It's not a shenanigan. So effectively, this week, one of the things that actually became topical is the fact that Michel Barnier, who's the head negotiator or chief negotiator, I should say, for the EU, has approached Her Majesty's loyal opposition parties. Notice I said parties, by a letter in order to effectively try and pressure or get them to pressure the government to effectively extend the Brexit deadline beyond the 31st of December this year. So far, as you probably all know, the government has been quite firm in this. Despite the coronavirus and all that, they basically said that we're out of here on the EU on the 31st. And then now the EU is basically, and which basically the EU has been trying for a very, very long time to actually extend this by at least a year, if not 2 years. But of course, the government's been firm. And effectively, I think what they decided to do this week is that they decided to actually write to the opposition parties to effectively tell them, or I guess encourage them to pressure on the government. Now, I'm keen to see what everyone's opinion on this is because I guess a couple of things that irks me about this is the EU should not actually be meddling into internal politics. This is one of the reasons why I think the UK voted to leave the EU, because they were tired of this supranational body meddling in our internal affairs. So by actually doing so, they're just effectively reiterating why the UK actually voted to leave the EU. The second thing is that I think it's highly inappropriate for effectively a supranational body to basically try and I guess deal with your opposition in order to try and coerce you. The proper channels is for them to actually discuss this with the government. And I mean, thankfully, at the moment, Boris Johnson has such a large majority in the House of Commons that it's a little bit of a, I guess it's a little bit nonsensical for them to actually do this, because they're not going to get anywhere. I hope they're not going to get anywhere. So I want to throw this over to you guys now and see what your thoughts are on that.
Have you been following this, Peter?
I read a newspaper article very quickly on it. But it seems very much like it frankly seems like a sensible thing to do, given the situation is probably like, I don't think anyone would have expected the COVID pandemic to happen, and you probably shouldn't be trying to deal with that and the economic ramifications, as well as also like seal Brexit in the same year. That's probably going a little bit too far. And I'd assume that really what's going to happen is the government's going to complain and say, or going to be very firm and say, no, we're not moving. And then at the last minute go, actually, yeah, we will. But they'll just do it very quietly around
Very
Christmas
quietly.
time, no
and
one's
you think
paying
it will be
attention.
extended?
I probably will. I assume so, because if the EU, the party in it who, to be honest, could probably just deal with whatever comes out of it the best, because there's a lot more people involved, there's a lot more countries involved, they've got Germany and France, etc., to prop everything up. I assume they're going to come out relatively positive, even if
But this is
a bunch of the trade deals don't get made.
Well, now Aaron's going to tell us why the European Union is doomed, I think.
Yes.
but this is the beauty of it. So okay, by that, sorry, Peter, but you know what? Your logic is slightly flawed. It doesn't add up. It's like 1 + 1 is 3. But the reason why I say this is that, okay, if you think that the EU is actually in a better position, in a much stronger position to actually weather this storm of the coronavirus, and to the extent that they really don't need the UK, then why would they be the party that's actually begging for an extension?
I would say that they're probably not. I'm
telling you, the answer is not because of the goodness of their own heart.
So there will obviously be some underlying motivation as to why they're wanting an extension. Yes. But I would assume that given, not necessarily talking about them weathering the corona situation, because they've got, in some ways, they're in a much worse position there. I just imagine that if the whole Brexit thing was to happen on the 31st, in a year or two's time, the EU will probably have been able to handle it better than the UK, simply because they've got more resources, and there's like a larger group of them who are able to basically like weather whatever the outcome of that is, and they'll all still have all their trade deals with various other countries. It's going to be us that are probably put in a bad position, and it feels like, as has happened in the past with the UK, we tend to be very brash when it comes to the EU and say that they're like tried to say that we're being very firm with them and all these other things, and then at the end we kind of just end up capitulating anyway, because it would probably make more sense if we didn't try and do everything in 2020.
But you know what? I don't think in fact, I don't think the UK actually capitulated. It depends on who the leader was. Okay, I'll give you an example. You know, when we had a weak leader like David Cameron, Tony Blair, who were Remainers effectively. Yeah, we capitulated. Like, Nigel Farage you made fun of David Cameron. When he met Angela Merkel, say, to get concessions for the UK, and in the EU Parliament, one of the EU Parliament speeches, he made fun of that and saying something like, well, he's going to go over there and talk to Mrs. Merkel, and Mrs. Merkel won't give him anything, and then he's going to take that back to the UK Parliament and say that, see, we've done our best, we've got something back for, and we can change the EU. So we had very weak leadership. I'll give you examples of very strong leadership. So number one, Margaret Thatcher. She was the one who, Simon will know that I love the woman. We need to rename Heathrow Airport after her.
Indeed.
That's another topic of conversation. But Margaret Thatcher, when she was known for basically, sitting the EU down and not actually letting them away until they gave her those tax rebates, or the rebates that she wanted, and she actually got it back. So it depends on who's the leader. Unfortunately for the EU, when Theresa May was leader of the Conservatives, she capitulated left, right, and center to the EU during the negotiations.
Aaron, I think we've got off the point of the topic. Your initial outrage is that the EU was seen collaborating with our opposition parties in an attempt to extend Brexit. And as Peter said, there's probably more contingency on their side. But is there, Peter? And this would be my point, that if we extended Brexit, we would be pulled into the next 7 years of funding cycle for the European Union. And as the second largest contributor, we would be representing a huge plug or hole, depending on whether or not we manage to get out in that time. And the European Union knows that they will need it because of the state of the Italian economy. But at the same time, I'm going to say that, Aaron, you're a bit naive if you don't think this sort of thing goes on all the time. Germany has been discovered spying on America, and I have met people who represented the Hillary campaign in 2015 in London. What were they doing, if not fostering links? I think it's a fairly standard kind of realpolitik and communications that would go on. But people have used this as a story to beat the EU further with. But at the same time, it links back to our previous conversation that Brexit isn't actually done yet. And Dominic Cummings is a key player. And that's why people who want to remain really wanted to out him.
But I think I think you're right. Okay, in fairness, yeah, I think you're right. Like, I'm sure that a lot of these things go on behind the scenes, like Joe Biden and Burisma and all that, or Hunter Biden, I should say, not Joe Biden. But effectively, I think that the main thing that I guess I have a problem with this is that we all know for a fact that the main reason why they actually want us to extend this is because of the big hole that we're going to leave in their budget. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, that they actually mentioned that Michel Barnier mentioned that in his letter. And he basically said that, we will of course be open to extending the transition period to 2 years, so long as there's some, I'm paraphrasing here, but effectively, so long as there's some financial, financial contribution into it. So we all know that. And so I think, this is why I disagree with what Peter said, is that, Peter's kind of like saying that, they're going to weather this fine, they're going, they'll be fine because they've got more countries to trade with, and so on and so forth. I think, what we're forgetting is that we are actually leaving a big hole in their budget, and they're actually, shitting themselves at the moment because of the fact that, their economies are collapsing. Sweden's expecting to shrink, itself is expecting to shrink by 7% in the next year, and then they've got they just pledged 500 billion euros for the to respond to COVID. A lot of the richer countries are not happy about that because it's effectively giving 500 billion euros to countries like Italy and France, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark, and I'm forgetting one other country.
From the frugal four.
aren't that keen on it. And so I think that I think they're in a much more worse state, and this is why they're trying to clamor on to us. And and just to kind of like juxtapose this, by the way, if we all just recall, maybe cast our minds back when Theresa May was in government, the EU never budged. They never, they said that there was a hard deadline on this. They never budge. And now who's asking and groveling for an extension? The EU,
Well, that's a good point. Any last thoughts, Peter?
I mean, I guess it's probably out of all of it, we're only seeing a small part of the picture, right? I'm sure this is just some tactics that are being used in some negotiating room somewhere, and we're going to come out of it saying one thing, and they'll say another thing, and then someone will be sent something.
No, I think we've seen the whole picture. We've been in this drama for the past nearly 4 years now, 3-4 years now. We've seen the full picture. We saw the EU when they had the upper hand in negotiation because of the stupidity of the May government and the incompetence of the May government. And then now we suddenly have a hardline Brexiter at the helm who's drawn like a firm date, and they're unprepared to negotiate. It took them they were unprepared for like 2 years. What were they doing? Sitting in their thumbs and and twiddling because they didn't think that May was going to pull things through. So they were caught off guard, and then now they're absolutely scared to death that we're actually going to go out on WTO. And I honestly think that screw that. Let's go out on WTO. On WTO terms on the 31st of December. I would be very happy for the country to actually do that. And I actually think we're going to be fine. And England will prevail.
I'm sure, yes. Thank you for your optimism. Sunny as always. And what did you want to say about Trump and Twitter? What's your hot take on that news story?
Oh, the Trump and Twitter thing. Yeah.
Last point. You have to be quick. You've only got a couple of minutes. Just tell us about it.
Twitter trying to basically couldn't quite ban Trump and get rid of his Twitter account because he's the president of the United States. So instead, they put like little post-its on it or messages on it saying you need to fact check this because it's actually not factually correct. Mm-hmm. So is this a form of censorship? Over to you.
I think that goes back to my immortal quote, I'm just the broadcaster, not the editor, or something like this. If they accept that anyone can write anything on their website within reason, then they also have to accept that people could lie. They don't act, and if they begin providing editorial comment by adding a little exclamation mark, that brings into lots of questions about how far Twitter is responsible for what's published on their platform. And as they also host ISIS accounts, that's probably not a good way for it to go. Peter?
I think I kind of agree, but they're probably also in a situation that I don't think any organization has probably ever been in before. So
truly extraordinary
they're probably going to get it wrong.
I imagine that this story will run for a while and we'll be able to pick it up next week. So I'll probably sign us off there. Everyone happy?
Okay.
Always.
I didn't ask you what you're drinking. What are you drinking? What's everyone drinking?
Sauvignon Blanc.
Lemonade.
Lemonade. I was having a water. And Aaron?
Sauvignon Blanc.
Excellent. Fine choice. Okay. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.